rules of being cliché. Number 1. The first rule of being cliché is living a cliché-filled type of life. Life is so full of clichés, don't you think? And especially with the type of stories and entertainment we are forced to watch and listen to drown our minds to death with. This story is also going to be one of those cliché type of stories where the obvious causal link ends with an obvious result. I mean, have you ever watched something so cliché and predictable that it made you look like some sort of psychic? I mean, I have. I want to first talk about a creature or some higher being called the Cliché Man. The Cliché Man always feeds off of clichés, which I am sure most of you have already guessed straight away, and I am sure you also have realized that the Cliché Man gets stronger when in a clichéd environment. I had a pretty normal life, with a wife and 2 children, and while I was the main breadwinner of the household, my wife took care of the kids and the house. Life was pretty good in the normal good family sense of the word, and I also managed to take my family out on holidays, family days out to restaurants, and so on. So we were a pretty clichéd family to start off with, which attracted the Cliché Man in the first place, which I am sure a lot of you could have already predicted. Number 2. The second rule of being cliché is weird things suddenly happening without much reason. In the first couple of weeks leading up to the Cliché Man invading my life, I started getting so many so-called psychics following me around everywhere and telling me my future and the future of my family. It was things like my wife will start having an affair, and I must follow the rules of being cliché, and I would have to murder my wife and her lover. I thought they were crazy, but one day while I was on my break in my office, I got a phone call from my wife saying that she had an affair with another man in our own bedroom. I honestly didn't know what to think or feel about any of it, but then my wife said, "You've got to follow the rules of being cliché and murder me and my lover." Number 3. The third rule of being cliché is my marriage and what I have always known and loved going bad. So then I came home to find that my wife and her new lover were in our bed, prepared to be killed by me. I wasn't even angry or furious, just highly confused and freaked out. There was a knife outside our bedroom door, and I saw both my wife and her lover just smiling at me, waiting to be killed by me. Because that's what usually happens when a husband finds his wife with another man in their own bedroom. Look, you two, I don't know what the rules of being cliché are, but I'm going back to work, I told my wife and her lover, and both of them looked so disappointed and angry with me for disobeying the rules of being cliché made by the Cliché Man. Dad, you must follow the rules of being cliché, because if you don't, the Cliché Man will be angry, my 2 sons told me, and I didn't notice before that they were both right there behind me. Number 4. The fourth rule of being cliché is some weird paranormal ability being performed on you to force you to do something against your will. Out of nowhere, my mind swapped with my wife's mind, and I was in her body, and she was in mine. My wife then threatened me while in my body that if I don't follow the rules of being cliché, then she will take over my body forever, after killing her body with my mind inside it. I desperately decided that I will murder her and her lover if my mind could go back into my body, and it did. Obviously, I am sure a lot of you have guessed by now that my family's minds had been taken over by the Cliché Man. How predictable, right? As soon as I was back in my own body, I ran over to my wife and stabbed her to death, and then I murdered her lover. My 2 sons ran over to me and hugged me, shouting in joy, "Well done, Father. The Cliché Man will be so pleased. You followed the rules of being cliché and predictable." Number 5. The fifth rule of being cliché is having your close loved ones affected by a tragic incident. The ages of my sons are 13 and 15, and the obvious next phase of my two sons seeing me murder their mother is they go goddamn crazy and start acting out. I put the bodies of my wife and her lover down in the cellar where we keep a large freezer which could fit both their bodies. That year, my two sons started behaving badly and getting into trouble, and whenever I questioned them about it, my son's reply would be, "It's the rules of being cliché. Youngsters like us who have witnessed something terrible go crazy and start acting out because we have something bottled up," my sons would tell me. Then I heard my wife calling me from downstairs in the cellar from the freezer. "Stan, you should understand the rules of being cliché by now." My dead wife's body would shout out from the cellar freezer and I would shake in fear. "Yes, honey," I replied shakily. Number 6. The sixth rule of being cliché is always having someone outside hearing something, seeing something, and knowing something. Now, in these sorts of situations, there is always predictably some sort of friend, colleague, or family member who notices something strange, or saw something, or heard something. I guess that is exactly what happened when my next-door neighbors came over to meet me. Without any friendliness or anything to break the ice, they instantly started talking about the rules of being cliché and what their role was going to be. They were the ones to go to the police to report to them about me and the disappearance of my wife. Then this was where I eventually get arrested and my two sons go into care and get mental health treatment. I was against everything from the start, and I didn't want to be a part of this cliché or follow any of the stupid rules about belonging to this cliché. Number 7. The seventh rule of being cliché is eventually being stuck in some horrible situation which you cannot escape and cannot break out of. Then my mind swapped with my dead wife's body, and it was so cold and empty. I couldn't even shiver, cry, or shout for help. I could hear my wife in my body, and she was enjoying herself being warm and being able to move around again. She came down while inside my body and basically said to me, "The cliché man will let you back in your body if you promise to follow the rules of being cliché." And I desperately and cowardly agreed, and how cliché of me was that. I am now back in my body, and my next-door neighbors have gone to the police, and I have hugged and kissed my boys goodbye forever. I'm so sorry that this story has been so cliché and predictable.